So today, the session on TB R&D agenda, we hope to impress upon you in this session that research is not a luxury, but it is a necessity to end the TB epidemic. You will hear that there are huge gaps in financing TB research, and we need to, at a global level, ensure that the march to find better diagnostics, drugs and vaccines continues. We need innovative funding, and we need to make these interventions available and to scale up in developing countries. We also need to de-link the cost of research and development from the cost of health products. So we need to grow this research capacity, and we need to urgently develop national and international research infrastructure and collaborations across countries. And hopefully this BRICS meeting gives us a wonderful opportunity to explore collaborations between the low middle income countries and BRICS. It's very important. Around the sides of the room, you will see the WHO Global Investments in Tuberculosis Research and Development. And this is a beautiful book. It talks about the past, the present, and the future. And I would encourage everybody to get a copy of this and see how we can work together. I would like to now introduce Dr. Tony Fauci. He is the director of the largest global funder of biomedical research in TB. He is the director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. Tony Fauci has many, many awards and many, many accolades. And I want to just note two. One, he's the current recipient of the Gardner Global Health Award, and this was in recognition of his architecture of the PEPFAR program, and he helped translate the findings of clinical research into scale-up, and the PEPFAR program has directly improved the lives of many, many, many Africans who were HIV infected. He's also a member of the National Academy of Medicine, and he is a prolific scientist and a visionary in infectious diseases. So Tony is going to talk to us about the landscape of TB research and how to focus on the opportunities we have and some of the challenges going forward. Thank you very much, Tony.
Thank you very much, Glenda, for that introduction. I welcome the opportunity to speak to you today and set the stage for the discussion of the panel on the issue of research in the area of tuberculosis. I mean, obviously, this is something that I believe, and I think most people in the room believe, has been somewhat of a neglected component of the broad international effort towards tuberculosis, and hopefully we'll be able to turn that around a bit as we have over the past few years. But before I start, I know that this was discussed in several of the panels yesterday. But just to put it into context, in case anybody, at least outside of this room, doesn't fully appreciate the seriousness of tuberculosis, if you look at it in total historical disease burden, it essentially dwarfs even the great historic killers that we know. For example, smallpox and malaria, influenza, AIDS, cholera, and plague, with over 1 billion deaths and probably many more historical burden of tuberculosis. If you look at the current epidemiology, we all know it's one of the top 10 causes of death worldwide, with 10 million cases a year, 1.7 million deaths, a problem of both multiple and extensively resistant tuberculosis. So we clearly have a problem that we must deal with, and the research endeavor is one of the avenues that we can, not the only one, but one of them. So there is a global strategy to end TB from the WHO, which is the reason why we are here at this meeting in Moscow. I have a red arrow on this slide to show you that we have tried in the United States to mirror the strategy of the global WHO NTB strategy. And in fact, we've aligned what we do. But what I'm going to talk about over the next several minutes is the broader NTB strategy. There are 3 major pillars, I know many in this room are familiar with them, that relate to how we hope to end the world of TB. One is an integrated patient-centered care and prevention. The other are bold policies and supportive systems. But the one we'll focus on over the next several minutes is the intensified research and innovation. I tend to look at TB research portfolio in 3 buckets that interdigitate and relate to each other. The first is generic TB in general, apart from other sub-aspects of TB. The others are the special issue that we have in the field of TB with the problem of multiple and extensively drug-resistant TB. And then importantly, even though TB as a problem apart from HIV is big enough to be concerned about, there is a very important relationship between TB and HIV co-infection, which whenever you talk about research related to TB, you have to take that at least into consideration. So if we take that 3 separate buckets, there are 4 areas that I want to briefly touch upon, and they're shown on this slide. The first is the issue of pathogenesis. It seems that a disease that's so ancient as tuberculosis, and for so many years that we've been working on it, that we would have a profound and detailed knowledge of the pathogenesis of tuberculosis, when in fact we do not. In fact, it's somewhat embarrassing to us in the scientific community. There are extraordinary gaps in understanding the dynamics of human TB disease. This whole issue of systems biology that we talk about, the complex interaction between pathogen and host. A lot of diseases talk about systems biology approach. From a personal standpoint, as someone who's involved in the interdigitation between microbe and the immune system, I can't think of another disease that's more amenable to a systems biology approach than is tuberculosis. And then there are specific issues that we still don't fully understand. One of the underlying tenets of tuberculosis is the concept of latency, disease activation, and correlates of immunity. So if you just stop and think for a moment how little we know about the details of latency, why it's latent, how you induce latency, what's the correlate of immunity to prevent going from latency to activation. These are things that we don't understand very well. There are special challenges for HIV co-infection, namely the high rate of progression from active TB in HIV-infected individuals. The very different clinical radiological manifestations, the reduced immune control and extrapulmonary TB, and the limited models. I happen to personally have, because of the field that I'm in, a personal understanding and experience because I'm fundamentally an HIV physician. I've spent the last 36 years taking care of and studying HIV infection. And the tools that we have to study HIV infection are extraordinary compared to when you compare it with tuberculosis, and I'll get back to that in a moment. One of them is in the area of diagnostics. Most settings today still have antiquated diagnostics. What we need is to transform that. We've made some headway, of course, but we still need point of care, simple, accurate, inexpensive areas of diagnosis of clinical specimens from multiple body sites. We tend to be focused on the diagnosis of pulmonary specimens, but we know now that that, in fact, is inadequate. If you look at things like PET scanning, which has now given us a very different viewpoint on both the pathogenesis and the response to therapy. If you look at the rapid diagnostics, we have GeneXpert. That's a tremendous advance, but we have to do better. We need next generation, and we need to be able to take a look at samples that go beyond sputum. The reason I say this is that I reflect on this all the time. And again, I just want to get back for a moment to the issue of HIV. So in HIV, when you have someone who presents with active disease, they have 2-3 million copies of RNA virus in their blood. We can measure down to a single copy. So not only do we have great diagnostics, we could monitor therapy. We have major immune correlates. If you take the field of cancer, you have liquid biopsies where you can look for RNA of cancer in people to determine if they have early metastasis. That's an entirely different arena than we have with tuberculosis, when it's so difficult not only to diagnose, but to actually follow the therapy. We need to do better. Again, the challenges with HIV,
Bacillary pulmonary disease is very common. It requires higher testing sensitivity, and the diagnosis in children is more difficult. Then there are therapeutics. Again, the WHO has clearly indicated the importance of the need for new non-toxic drugs and shorter regimens for multiple drug-resistant tuberculosis and tuberculosis in general. We all know these statistics, but maybe it's a good idea to just quickly remind us of it. We need 4 drugs for 6 months. We have about an 83% cure rate of newly diagnosed disease. MDR is 4 to 7 drugs for up to 20 months with about a 50% cure rate. 50% of patients with MDR-TB have resistance to second-line drugs, and with XDR-TB, it's effective in only 30% of patients. And if you look again at the current challenges, the length and complexity of treatment regimens, the problem of adherence and monitoring. You know, sometimes inappropriately as physicians, we blame patients for lack of adherence to a therapeutic regimen. Except when you think about how difficult it is to take drugs that often don't make you feel very well over a period of several months. And the thing that I know as a physician I've experienced, you have someone who feels sick, you give them an anti-tuberculous drug, they start to feel better. And then what makes them feel badly is the drug that they're taking for the next several months. So we're in a very interesting dilemma that we need to get over that. We need to have something that's unimaginable, and I always talk about let's reimagine tuberculosis, reimagine it in a way where you could treat someone for a relatively short period of time and essentially cure them and monitor the cure. Again, the special challenges for HIV co-infection. The drug-drug interactions, when we bring fellows on our ward who are residents or infectious disease fellows who see our patients with HIV, several of whom have tuberculosis, if you want to treat someone for tuberculosis and HIV, you almost have to go to a computer to figure out what the drug-drug interactions are because there are so many of them. And that's something we need to make sure that we get around. Also, we have limited availability of pediatric drug formulations. And then there's the risk of the immune reconstitution inflammatory syndrome, or IRIS, which is very unique for situations with HIV, and TB, as well as Cryptococcus and others, is one of the main offenders, where you actually treat somebody for HIV and their TB symptoms get worse. We don't have many other diseases where you have to worry about that. The pipeline, again, is better than it was a couple of years ago. We have bedaquiline now. We have delaminid, which we thought was really good, but now we're starting to get some recent data that's maybe telling us a little bit different. But if you look at the drugs, when I started off with HIV, we had no drugs. In 1987, the FDA and other regulatory agencies approved AZT. Now we have more than 30 drugs that are approved when given in combination of 3, usually with 1 pill, is therapy that's profoundly effective. We don't have that. We have drugs that come along every few decades. Again, we've got to do better than that. We're trying by a program called the TB Drug Accelerator, which is a partnership that's been established with 7 pharmaceutical companies and 6 research institutions that are collaborating on early drug discovery to kind of break that logjam of a lack of a lot of new drugs. What about clinical capacity to do trials? Again, I get back to something I'm very familiar with. Several years ago, when we first started getting HIV drugs, I established at the NIH a clinical trials network, which is the largest clinical trials network in the world, in which we spend hundreds of millions of dollars for. It involves drug treatment, prevention, vaccine, adolescents, networks for the community, microbicide trials. It worked really well. we need that for TB, and a start for that is that I've now expanded several of these clinical trial networks to include both TB with HIV and soon TB alone. So it's just the start, but we need to keep going in that direction. And then finally, there's the issue of prevention and vaccines, and I'll focus on the vaccine component of it. We have a problem, and we've had a problem for a long time. We all know that BCG is not effective in preventing adult pulmonary TB, which is the most transmissible form of the disease. It's no longer recommended in HIV co-infected children for obvious reasons of BCGiosis. And new and safe, effective vaccines against all forms of tuberculosis are urgently needed. There is a pipeline, but as I'm sure you heard just a little while ago, we need to make it much more robust than it is. So I'm staying within my time frame, and I want to end with this slide, which is a quote from my dear friend Eric Goosby, in which, as you know, Eric is the United States Special Envoy on TB, and he has said back in March of 2015, the progress that's been made in combating TB has been hard-won, so we shouldn't be beating ourselves up too much. But, and it's a big but, it needs to be intensified if we really are going to wipe out or end TB, which is the reason why we're gathered here in Moscow today. And the End TB strategy offers new hope to the millions of people suffering and losing their lives to TB each year. And it is time to join forces to create a world free of TB. And there are multiple aspects of how you do that. And certainly, intensifying our research effort is an important and integral part of that effort. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. And I think we've got a new mantra. We have to reimagine TB and rethink it and reimagine it. And I hope that will become the theme of our TB research agenda, to reimagine how to do TB research. I'm going to ask the rest of the panelists to come up. We're going to ask the European Commissioner of the DG for Health, Vytenis Andriukaitis, sorry if I say it wrong, the Minister of Health and Family Welfare in India, Mr. Jagat Prakash Nadda, the Russian Federation Deputy Minister of Healthcare, Dr. Yakovleva Tatiana, the Deputy Minister of Health in the Republic of Ghana, Ms. Tina Gifty Na Ayeley, and also I'd like the tag, Ms. Erika Lessem, the Deputy Director for TB Project from the Treatment Action Group, please to come up. So we're very fortunate to have an amalgamation of the funders on the podium, as well as the Ministries of Health and the Treatment Action Group, who represent the advocates today. And we're going to ask them some questions. I'm going to pose some questions to them first, and then I'm going to ask the audience to also discuss it. We're also going to have some statements from various groupings, and we're also going to have a declaration on a BRICS research strategy. But first of all, I'm going to put the EC on the spot right away. The EC has been active in funding TB research through TB vaccine research through Horizon 2020, the Horizon 2020 program, and you have done an amazing job in committing to TB vaccine research. With the recent developments on the antimicrobial agenda and the inclusion of TB in the WHO's priority list for antibiotic-resistant bacteria, and considering the recent G20 commitment to create a research hub on antimicrobial resistance, how will this impact on TB research? We are concerned that the TB multi-drug resistance will fall at the bottom of a list of antimicrobial research, and we want to hear how the EC will ensure that the TB research agenda, particularly in terms of drug development, is not lost in this long queue of antimicrobial resistant research priorities.
Thank you very much indeed. I am very happy to be here today, and especially thank you for your excellent, encouraging speech and a very real picture of what we can address and how we can act together. You know, more than 10 years have passed since the European Commission identified tuberculosis as priority area of research funding. 10 years. We have supported research in this area to the tune of 276 million euros. It's not enough, but it's a big amount. From 2007 to 2013, we invested 118 million euros in 50 tuberculosis projects, including large multidisciplinary consortia undertaking research for tuberculosis vaccine development, diagnostics, and new treatments. And our current framework program for research and investment, Horizon 2020, as you mentioned, the Commission has invested well over 100 million euro in tuberculosis research. It includes 2 large tuberculosis vaccine development projects. Other projects address tuberculosis drug development, diagnostic and research on multi-drug resistance TB. Moreover, the European and developing countries clinical trial partnership, you know about that. The European partnership with countries in Africa has recently made a significant investment in clinical trials for promising tuberculosis vaccine candidates. Our public-private partnership, that so-called Innovative Medicine Initiative, has dedicated over 40 million to support preclinical development of anti-tuberculosis drug combinations and diagnostics. Under this initiative, the Commission is also preparing a course for proposals to support the development of new medicines to address antimicrobial resistance. Indeed, multi-drug resistance tuberculosis is a major stress, no doubt. And of the over 10 million people who got tuberculosis in 2015, almost 500,000 suffered from multi-drug resistant tuberculosis. You know that, let me assure you that fighting antimicrobial resistance, in particular multi-drug resistant tuberculosis, is firmly on our agenda. Earlier this year, I presented the European Union One Health Action Plan against IMR. This sets out actions to combat IMR, including drug resistant tuberculosis. The plan aims to support national action plans to make the EU as one of the best regions against IMR, boost research, development, and innovation to develop novel solutions, and to work together with our international partners. In addition, our research work program 2018-2020 calls for research into new and better antimicrobials. This will expand our range of weapons to fight antibiotic-resistant bacteria such as tuberculosis. We also need to research the alternatives of antimicrobials to give doctors and patients more treatment options. We intend to fund research that will look at how the body's natural defense operates when under attacks. Thinking about national IMR action plans, I would like to stress the importance of development and, what is more important, the implementation of national One Health action plans by the WHO members, in particular taking into account that the World Health Assembly urged all member states to develop and have in place national action plans on IMR by 2017. It means that tuberculosis must be enshrined in those national action plans. And of course, I see good possibilities to collaborate with all member states and of course globally to draw attention that in all our national action plans, tuberculosis must be stressed as very challenging issues. This is why we are supporting the Global Collaboration Hub on Research and Development on Antimicrobial Resistance, as announced at the G20 in 2017. Together we can promote coordination and alignment between public and private initiatives like Joint Program Initiative on Antimicrobial Resistance. I am very optimistic to see possibilities to encourage private funds, industry to be more and more active, especially when we have such excellent advocates globally. We need to join our forces. EU is ready to go in such direction. Thank you.
So that's wonderful. We heard about how important it is for for the public sector to fund research and to work with the private sector to look at innovative ways of funding, particularly drug research. And we're also gratified to hear the commitment that TB drug-resistant treatment remains a priority for the European Commission. So thank you very much. Moving to India, our Minister of Health and Welfare in India, Mr. Jagat Prakash. So I think India is leading the way in terms of looking at how to do TB research at a country level. And you've recently created India's TB Research Consortium. And this is a fine example because it looks at ways of coordinating and mainstreaming research across many sectors, including the public, private, health, and technology. And this is the whole idea for fast-tracking goal-orientated TB and R&D agenda. And I hope that India will be the light and the guiding light for us in BRICS and try and work, how do we take TB, this kind of consortium from India to BRICS to a global level. So we'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
Thank you for the question. As we all know that India has been a pioneer as far as the research and development is concerned. And we have been taking initiatives as far as the short course regimen is concerned, as far as domiciliary treatment was concerned, and we also experimented the DOT program, the direct observation treatment program, that was also experimented in India and gave good results. Keeping in view, we constituted India TB Research Consortium, where we brought the public and the private field together, and we tried to collaborate with each other and all the stakeholders working together for research and going forward in that direction. For this also, the government of India has approved $21 million US, and at the same time, Tata Trust has also contributed $3 million US, and we are trying to see involved more and more as far as the financial part is concerned, and to see to it that how this consortium can work and bring more people, bring more organizations from the private sector. It is actually to do the research in a mission mode, and we are working in the field of diagnostics, where new anti-TB diagnostics are coming up. The same way we are working on drug regimen, and we are working on vaccines and immunotherapies, and trying to strengthen the scientific capabilities. These are the areas in which the consortium is working. The consortium is collaborating with all the relevant stakeholders working in the area of TB research. So in a way, all organizations which are working to end TB, we are taking them into as stakeholders and trying to see to it that how we can mainstream and take their inputs and work together. As far as the research proposals are concerned, immediately the success which we have got is in the new rapid molecular test for tuberculosis and rifampicin resistance. This is called TrueNat. So here we are also able to know where the patient is susceptible and he's resistant to the drug, to rifampicin, and we can go forward and go to another stage of drug administration to the patient. As far as the therapeutics is concerned, 9 key drug trials are shortlisted, and we are going very soon on that. And as far as the vaccines are concerned, 3 have been shortlisted as testing kits, and it's in the phase 2 of the clinical trials where we are working. As far as the active case findings are concerned, we are trying to improve upon and strengthening the notification systems, increasing the treatment and adherence, and reducing the costs. We are working to see to it that the costs are reduced. And how we can do it, that is one area where we are working and we are trying to see to it. As far as the technology is concerned, we are trying to see that it supports the patient, and mobile health is also one area where we are working. Community outreach, how we can do it. And the consortium approach is to see that the collaboration, how best we can bring down the cost. As I said, it's to be cost effective. These are the areas in which we are working. It's an experiment which we are going forward, and I feel that in this direction, by collaborating with all the private stakeholders, the Government of India and the Consortium will be successful and bring many new results.
So India is a real trailblazer, and I think we should give them a hand of applause. And we look forward to this new diagnostic. I have spoken to some of the Indian researchers, and it sounds incredibly important, and I'm very excited about hearing about it. Another trailblazer in terms of leading the fight to NTB is the Russian Federation. And Dr. Tatiana from the ministry, she's the Deputy Minister of Healthcare, she's going to be discussing about how we can work together in BRICS. So following a series of declarations from BRICS, we understand that a BRICS consortium on TB, HIV, and malaria, as well as a BRICS TB research network, will be or has been established. This is an incredibly exciting development for the TB community. We would like you to comment on what you foresee Russia's role in advancing TB research through these platforms. Thanks.
Thank you very much, distinguished colleagues. We all know that BRICS has established the research network on tuberculosis due to the initiative of the Ministry of Healthcare of Brazil. We had the first working meeting, and we already have plans for 2017, 2018, and according to the Russian initiative, the second meeting was organized. As you know, Russia has a very significant research and scientific potential. We have the TB Research Institute in Novosibirsk, in Moscow, in St. Petersburg. We have the Central TB Research Institute. We also established the National TB and Infectious Disease Institute. Irina Anatolievna is present here, and she is our chief specialist on these issues. Representatives of many countries know her very well. As for Russian manufacturers, they produce all drugs, all anti-TB drugs. As for the equipment used for TB diagnosis, drug susceptibility tests, they are manufactured in the Russian Federation. I agree with the first presenter. Don't we need new drugs? Don't we need innovative anti-TB drugs? Of course we do, especially if they are very effective, more rapid in terms of their mode of action. Only two drugs became new over the last 50 years, and of course I agree with the colleague from India. There is a need to work on new innovative drugs, and in Russia we should also do the same. We should unite our efforts to accelerate this process. Don't we need new vaccines? Well, I agree, BCG is a good vaccine, but it is already out of date. Well, we vaccinate the children after their birth. It's good for 7 years. At age 7, we revaccinate children again. But what about the adult population? The adult population is not protected against tuberculosis. So we need a vaccine that could protect the people 100%. In Russia, there is such a vaccine already, and it is at the stage of clinical trials. Actually, there are 2 vaccines in Russia, and I know that other BRICS countries also have similar vaccines. We need to unite our efforts here. New tests to diagnose tuberculosis, well, to detect drug susceptibility. That's also important. important. In Russia, we already introduced the tuberculin recombinant drug, and of course here we can have a differential diagnosis. We can see what is the true sensitivity is without allergic reactions, and we have achieved quite a success here. And I can speak volumes on different research capabilities that Russia has, but our goal is the same. To end tuberculosis, we must do everything possible to end tuberculosis so that we could wipe this infection off the face of the earth. Only if we pool our efforts, we will solve this problem. Thank you very much.
So I like the commitment. Let's wipe TB off the earth. I think we have to say that we have to reimagine TB so we can wipe it off the earth. Thank you very much. I'm going on now to our colleague from Ghana. She's our Deputy Minister of Health at the Republic of Ghana. And often innovation happens and drugs are developed and vaccines are developed, and yet we have such challenges in scaling up interventions and bringing them into our healthcare system. And so translating and implementing new research tools and interventions at a country level requires huge commitment from the government and huge translation of that evidence into training of human capacity and introducing it into the healthcare system and monitoring and evaluation. Now, Ghana has a wonderful example and has wonderful experience on taking innovation to various subpopulations to facilitate scale-up and to make sure that access to health is equitable. And so we would like to hear a little bit more about how you see this happening in the area of TB prevention and care.
Thank you, Moderator. Your Excellencies, all protocol observed. The government of Ghana has been concerned with the country's low TB case detection. Prevalence has indicated that Ghana has relatively higher rates burden than previously estimated. This means that we need to move fast to solve our case detection challenges. Therefore, we have positioned ourselves and keen to take up new innovations, interventions, and tools that will help us solve our challenges. And the question is, how have we done this? We have put in place a standing multisectorial group comprising the MOH, that is the Ministry of Health, the academia, university teaching hospitals, medical research institute, civil society, private sector, and the National TB Program to actively review new interventions, tools, medicines, and recommend for rapid uptake by the Ministry of Health and then the National TB Program for implementation. Therefore, recommended tools, interventions are rapidly adapted into health sector strategy plans as part of national response to end TB and to provide policy directions, program framework for national or countrywide implementation. Because of the cooperation between the MOH and the National TB Program, financing mechanism is then easily mobilized from government and other partners for systematic scale-up within national strategic plan implementation framework. Our goal for newly adapted intervention is to ensure universal access to vulnerable, high-risk population and general population. Scaling up is formed by principle of equity among other disease-related factors such as burden, geographical access, and population size, among others. The government has since acquired and scaled up digital estuaries in healthcare facilities setting to complement gene experts, midgets, LPA rollout with respectable and moderate country coverage, averaging between 60 and 65%. Government has instituted an active TB screening as a component of finding missing TB cases in hard-to-reach population, rolling out with acquisition of mobile X-ray van, so no one is left behind. A system of ensuring 100% coverage to other diagnoses, such as gene expert, is currently underway through an established system of specimen collection and transportation to ensure everybody is covered. Implementation research is integral to all scale-up and is often taken in partnership with the Ministry of Health Research Institute, Medical Research Institute, the National TB Program, and the international research partners when it's needed. Thank you very much.
So as recipients of health innovation, Ghana has understood the importance of financing the innovation and also using collaborative efforts as well as new and modern technology to bring the most vulnerable population access to life-saving medication. And I think you're a fine example of how to move forward in this area despite coming from limited resources. So we congratulate you on your efforts. I turn to my last panelist, and this is Ms. Erica Lessem, who's the Deputy Director for the TB Project in Treatment Action Group. Now, Erica, I come from an area of HIV research. I was an activist before I was a clinician, before I was a scientist. And so I understand the role of advocacy in trying to bring down drug prices and charge through innovation. And so I would like to ask you, looking back at HIV and lessons learned from HIV, how do we mobilize civil society and advocacy groups in TB? And what is this role, and how can we get this voice to help galvanize commitment by the global community for filling the gap of R&D funding?
Thank you for the question, and thank you for your commitment to both HIV and TB. It's very much appreciated. The HIV movement has taught us that with funding for innovation and with political will for implementation, devastating epidemics can be tamed. The HIV movement also taught us that fierce activism may be necessary to bring about this political will and funding. The esteemed Dr. Tony Fauci, who just spoke, is an ally of activists. He comes to us from the US National Institutes of Health, which, as you know, is the leading funder of TB research, and it's also an exemplary organization in engaging affected communities in the research, design, and implementation processes. But let the record show, it was not always so. In May 1990, the AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power stormed the NIH. 1,000 protesters gathered. They demanded many of the same things we need in TB today: more and better treatment options, especially for co-infections, an end to underrepresentation of vulnerable groups in clinical trials, more engagement of affected communities in the research process. And they were successful. Shortly after, NIH's AIDS clinical trials groups opened its doors to HIV advocates and community members. Let the record show, over 30 new drugs have been approved for HIV in the past 27 years. Only 3 new drugs have been approved for TB in the past 55 years. Part of this disparity is no doubt due to higher commercial interest in HIV, and we certainly need to engage private sector in TB research. But all the more reason to look to our governments for concrete financial commitments to end TB. We as civil society are here because despite talk of ending TB, incidence and mortality are stagnant and drug-resistant TB is on the rise. We can and must do better. And central to doing better is research into new interventions to fight TB. For these, we need to triple available funding for TB research. Our report shows that TB research funding is finally on the rise. We must capitalize on this hopeful momentum to close the research gap. We've learned from HIV activism to be bold in our demands and specific in our targets. We are asking every country to invest in TB research, just 0.1% of what it already spends on research overall. You can find your country's target and learn how we came to this number by reading this brief. Hopefully you've all received one. If not, you can come find me. Another tactic that we have learned from HIV activism is to give praise where praise is due, or when needed, to name and shame. Let the record show, the US government is the leading investor in TB R&D, but it too must increase its spending by over $100 million per year. India has shown remarkable leadership in TB R&D, leading the BRICS countries in reported spending on TB research, but India must triple its investments. Germany must increase its funding for TB research 6-fold. We laud Japan's leadership on universal health care and for working multisectorally to establish the GHIT Fund. But given Japan's tremendous capacity for R&D, we look to Japan to invest $150 million more per year in TB research. If these numbers sound like a lot, remember that if unabated, TB will cost the economy $1 trillion over the next 15 years, according to a recent analysis commissioned by Results UK. In line with the recommendations in the WHO policy paper that was released today, we welcome the BRICS TB Research Network, mentioned by President Putin yesterday and highlighted in today's presentations. This network will diversify support for TB R&D, which is currently over-dependent on the commendable investments of the US government and the Gates Foundation. This TB research network must be fully funded. We urge each delegation to commit to increased funding in line with our targets before the UN high-level meeting. But funding is not enough. This network must be efficient and collaborative. It should support innovative finance models, such as the Life Prize. It should include mechanisms to promote access and avoid the public paying twice, first to develop and then to procure innovations. The research it funds must be inclusive of community input in line with good participatory practice, and evidence-based outputs must be rapidly taken up to promote the right to health and the right to the benefits of scientific progress. If you want TB to benefit from even a fraction of the research success and epidemiological progress that HIV has seen, you have to bring the political will, the funding, and the openness to communities, including their ideas and their criticisms that have been seen in the HIV response. The photo on my slide is from a march and die-in organized by the Treatment Action Campaign in 2015 in Cape Town, where civil society issued a call for BRICS countries to triple TB R&D funding. I take this opportunity to quote from Tax General Secretary Ayeley at the closing ceremony of the Union Conference that march surrounded. Comrades, the lack of investment in TB is a political problem. At its essence, it is about governments not being held accountable for failing to respond to TB. We are not going to change it if we accept business as usual. We will have to organize and mobilize, and then be willing to hold our governments to account. We are glad for this opportunity of the Ministerial Conference and the high-level meeting next year to acknowledge TB as the political problem that it is. So let the record show, we come in a spirit of collaboration to end TB. We expect full funding for the TB response, including TB R&D, to come out of the high-level meeting, and we are willing to hold our governments to account.
Thank you. So I agree, if we want to wipe TB off the face of the earth, it can't be business as usual, and we can't ignore TB R&D. And now I'm going to come back to the first panelist, Tony Fauci. Tony, you showed a slide on the vaccine pipeline, and that was a very depressing slide because it showed a real lack of proliferation of candidates, and that's enough to make you slit your wrists when you see a slide like that. So you're a visionary, and you created the HVTN that in 17, 18 years has done enough work to get to 3 2B3 trials in HIV vaccine efficacy in 18 years. And could we learn, have you, as a visionary researcher and leader, how would we apply what we did in HIV vaccines to proliferate the TB vaccine research agenda?
Thank you for that question, Glenda. If you want to mimic to some extent the approach that we took with HIV, it really was two parallel tracks, and I think we need to do that with tuberculosis. The first was to get into clinical trials almost on an empiric basis, enough candidates so that you can get at least an indication of some efficacy effect so that you can build upon the correlate of immunity. This is very similar to what we did with the RV144 trial in Thailand, in which we showed a 31% efficacy, which was not ready for prime time for an HIV vaccine, but it allowed us to analyze in a very sophisticated way what the correlate of immunity is. So now we have the trial that you're a very important part of in South Africa, 702, in which we're looking at a similar platform, as well as other trials done, for example, by Jensen and others. That's one tract. The other tract, I think, is equally as important, and that is to ask some fundamental basic research questions that relate to the slide that I showed on understanding pathogenesis and correlative immunity. So you don't want to wait until you understand everything about the correlative immunity with tuberculosis before you go into an empiric trial, on the one hand. But on the other hand, you have to realize that we have a lot to learn simultaneously about what we're doing. So as you know, I spend most of my time trying to get more resources. We are doing very well. We, NIH, the United States, is the leading funder of tuberculosis research. Having said that, we need to do a lot more. And in the arena of contained and restricted resources, what we need to do is to prioritize those areas of global health that are very important. And I don't think that there's anybody around who can look at the first slide that I showed that can say that tuberculosis should not be at least among the top 1 or 2 priorities.
So I'm going to say amen, brother. Now I'm going to ask, we're going to have a group of people coming up, and these are statements from product development partnerships on the need for better tools for ending TB. And I'm going to ask FIND, TB Alliance, ERIS, and the TB Vaccine Initiative to come up and give your statements.
Glenda, thanks very much. And also on behalf of the 3 PDPs, really 4, who will be represented here today and presenting, I really want to extend thanks to the Russian Federation and WHO for making all this possible, and obviously to everybody in the audience. What we'd like to do today is just say a few words about the opportunities and the challenges that exist in creating new technological solutions for our common goal of TB eradication. I think all of us have probably seen the latest WHO Global TB report, and it's clear in that report that progress in the fight against tuberculosis is simply not fast enough to achieve the global targets to end TB. But with a markedly strengthened global commitment to research and development, and with new, highly innovative TB diagnostics, drugs, and vaccines, I have no doubt that we can dramatically alter the TB landscape and turn the most devastating disease in history of man, as Dr. Fauci clearly showed, and we can turn that into actually a relic of history. Specifically, in the area, let me start, of drug-resistant TB. There's a desperate need, again, as you've seen throughout, I think, the last day or so, for new TB treatments that are all oral, short, highly effective, safe, and affordable. And similarly, in terms of needs, I don't think we can overestimate the real need and benefit from strengthening clinical trial capacity and regulatory systems in the TB endemic countries, because clearly finding something new is critically important. Getting it out to the people who need it as quickly as possible is similarly important, and frankly, we haven't done a great job at either of those. But now let me switch and update everyone here on significant progress that has already been made in developing novel, impactful new TB treatments, and most importantly, I think, what we can all accomplish really in just the next few years with the appropriate resources. Fortunately, after many years of really hard work on the parts of multiple groups and people around the world, we now are on this doorstep of major breakthroughs in treating TB. And with sufficient investments, we can soon introduce new TB treatments that would benefit every single person with TB, and especially those with the most severe forms of drug-resistant TB. And again, let me give you another example that these treatments that we're on the verge of being able to deliver would mean that people with even drug-resistant TB would no longer need years of treatment, thousands of pills, daily injections of toxic drugs. Dr. Fauci really showed that extremely well, and even then have a poor chance of survival. And let me put on the record now, with sufficient funding, and even with within the next 3 to 4 years, no TB sufferer, even those with the most dire forms of XDR TB, should need more than 6 months of once daily, all oral, affordable, and highly effective treatment. We also have made significant progress in highlighting the path that perhaps over the next 5 to 10 years, that we would be in a position to treat all patients with TB with a single, uniform, once-a-day, all-oral, short of the order of potentially 3 months regimen that would be highly effective, safe, and of equal importance, affordable. Now, let me switch gears just a little bit, because in addition to the direct benefits to patients, investing in tomorrow's cure for TB is more than simply an ethical imperative. It's vital to give the ability to actually provide universal health coverage. And actually, it's vital for boosting economic prosperity, and I think that's been announced or that's been discussed in a few sessions already that we've heard over the last 24 hours. And the new technologies that are already being tested are not only about bringing life-saving benefits to millions of patients, but also dramatically lowering the costs for both healthcare systems and all people with TB. So the new regimens, easier to administer, more effective, shorter, they will significantly reduce the already excessive burden that exists and overwhelmed TB healthcare providers and free up the resources that already stretched governments simply don't have the ability to produce. So I think in summary, we share a common vision, certainly I believe for everybody in this room, in which every TB sufferer is treatable with a highly effective, well-tolerated, short, simple, and affordable medicine. The major limiting factor to a world without TB is a stronger commitment from the global community. Without sufficient investment, we will fall short in our efforts to once and for all eradicate TB. Together, with the sufficient commitment, we can end TB. So thank you very much. And with that, if I could turn this over to Katerina from the sister organization, FIND.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mel. Thank you very much, Linda. Dear ladies and gentlemen, dear excellencies. As Mel said, diagnostic and treatment go hand in hand. We need early and accurate diagnosis, which is key to starting patients on TB treatment, starting patients on the right treatment, and cutting the cycle of transmission. In 2016, 6 million of patients were diagnosed and notified, yet 10 million acquired TB. Also, the majority of drug-resistant patients were not identified. So how can we reach full diagnostic coverage? The first key action, let's make the most of the game-changing tools we already have through accelerated implementation at country levels. The out-of-step report highlighted that 50% of high-burden countries have adopted new WHO policies. However, that means that 50% have not. To realize the value of past investments in diagnostics R&D, but also to prepare for what is yet to come, we have to work together on a retooling framework and to make sure that we are better prepared to adopt new tools faster. The second key action, let's continue to fill the remaining critical R&D gaps, of which we have 3 of high priority. Dr. Fauci has highlighted the first priority. We need a non-sputum-based rapid diagnostic test that helps us find the missing millions where they first present for care, in primary healthcare settings. The second priority, we need companion diagnostics and expanded drug susceptibility testing to enable the introduction of new regimens, but also to preserve them when they become available. The third priority, we need an incipient TB test that would allow us to enable prophylaxis, more targeted preventive therapy. For each of these important R&D objectives, we have promising candidates. We have exciting new biomarker signatures, and as Dr. Fauci has said, we have technology breakthroughs from non-communicable diseases, from oncology, that we can apply to TB. But as Erika has highlighted, the funding gap is really putting these investments and exciting candidates at risk. For diagnostics in 2016, we received less than half of what we would have needed jointly to meet the global plan targets. So that brings me to my third key action. We have to strengthen national research efforts to be more focused on new tools on the R&D side, but also on operational research. So that needs to go hand in hand with renewed global commitment. National level research really plays, as we've seen at the example of India, a critical role for the development and introduction of new diagnostics. So we call on health ministries to really reflect this in their research agenda, to focus more on helping us to come with new tools and introduce them. And we're really excited to see the first molecular test approved in India, and we're delighted to work with India to bring this test through. We hope for the same from other BRICS and low-income countries. So in conclusion, you heard yesterday from Timpian about the long and arduous path to diagnosis. I think all of us today here in this room can commit to transforming this journey and really reimagining TB. Thank you very much.
So we're going to ask the ARIS and the TB vaccine initiative to come. Please don't go away. I see everyone's getting agitated. The best is yet to come, and we're going to have a spectacular announcement before the end of the session. So wait and don't go. It's very important.
Thank you, Glenda. I'm actually going to be giving the statement on behalf of both ARIS and TBVI and my colleague Nick Drager, who's the Executive Director at TBVI. I'd like to thank the Russian Federation, WHO, and the organizers of this meeting for inviting me to talk. And thank you also, Glenda, for your comments and for the panelists' comments. First of all, I'd just like to make the point that as Minister Motsoaledi of South Africa stated in his speech in the open session yesterday, a new effective vaccine has the potential to be truly game-changing in the fight to end TB. Quite simply, the world desperately needs innovation. Innovation to bring an end to the TB epidemic. It will take a revolutionary prevention strategy to mitigate the devastating human and economic impact of this disease. One of the most transformative innovations for our field would be a new, more effective TB vaccine. Quite simply, the world has never eradicated a major infectious disease without one. As we all know, we have an existing TB vaccine, BCG, which is an important vaccine and is used widely around the globe. However, it's nearly 100 years old, developed in a far, far earlier age of technology, and it's only partially effective in preventing disease in infants and children. Most importantly, it hasn't been enough to stop the epidemic, despite widespread global use. I'm pleased to say that we're making really tremendous progress in TB vaccine research with very limited resources. but it's going to take significant, sustained investment to achieve the vital breakthroughs we also desperately want and to reach success quickly. We now have 12 vaccine candidates in the global TB vaccine clinical pipeline, and also a growing preclinical pipeline with other promising candidates coming through. Also importantly, we now understand more about the human immune response to TB and the predisposing immune factors for developing TB disease, which are guiding our efforts to develop more effective vaccines, although we must do more in this area. Data from multiple mid- and late-stage efficacy trials of novel vaccine candidates will become available over the next 3 years. As Dr. Fauci has highlighted, this represents an unprecedented opportunity for the TB field to apply learnings from these studies to optimize and accelerate TB vaccine development. However, as we've heard for drugs and diagnostics, despite these promising developments, the lack of investment continues to be one of our biggest challenges. TB is the top infectious disease killer worldwide, but TB vaccine research only gets a fraction of the funds needed relative to TB's global impact. We simply cannot afford to neglect this investment any longer. We can and must do better. That's why it's more important than ever to include TB research in any global TB policy and strategy, including TB vaccine research. I'd also like to take up a point that Tony Fauci mentioned. I would like everybody to imagine for a moment a world without TB. That world cannot exist without a holistic TB prevention strategy that includes new drugs, new diagnostics, and new effective TB vaccines. Each of these interventions are essential, but to make them a reality, we need all of your help. We need your global commitment to support the key actions my colleagues and I have outlined here today. Then together, we can and will end TB. Thank you.
So how is it that we stand here today, and it's 2017, 2018, and we only have one vaccine that's almost 100 years old and doesn't work? You know, how did we get here? You know, where is our commitment at a global level for finding a TB vaccine? And I'd like us to think about that and really reaffirm our commitment to try and increase and populate the pipeline for TB vaccines. So now you have funders, you have the brains, you have ministries of health, you have advocates sitting here in front of you. And I'm going to ask the audience to pose some questions to this brain mass that we have here. Is George, where's George? Is George around? There you are. I think I'm going to give you the first question.
Yes. Thank you very much, Glenda. And first of all, I would like to thank all the speakers and ministers and relevant authorities on the stage for the wonderful presentations on science and innovation in TB research. I would like to add one angle which is gaining momentum in other fields, including, in fact, health, yet lacking wide application in the field of TB. And I'm talking about digital health technologies, which has also been mentioned by His Excellency, the Minister of India. And we believe that digital health technology could benefit very strongly community, patients, and programs. And because of this, and because also of a call from the World Health Organization, next to people, our organization, URC and Acuity, we are establishing a digital health technology facility which would be open, wide open to partners, inclusive, agile, and the scope would be to accelerate and identify and evaluate digital tools that could be very quickly scaled and implemented in affected countries and communities. So we just wanted to make the point that digital health technologies could also be part of the new innovation that are so badly needed in TB control. Thank you.
Thank you. So let's take a couple of questions and then we'll ask for a response. So I see one, put your hands up who wants to ask a question. So I can, there's one there. There's another one. I think the DG in South Africa has got a hand up as well. Gone. Okay, I think you first. She disappeared. Oh, there you are. Can we have some sound there? Oh, no, we can't hear, so we're going to need some sound. Unless there's a roving mic. Maybe you can come up. Oh, wait, there we have a roving mic.
Fran Dumelli, American Thoracic Society. Thank you for all your comments. The question I would have as we scale up all of this funding and we have all of these expectations, I've heard no one comment on who is the next generation of researcher who is going to be putting these plans in place. We have an extreme job in terms of capacity building to ensure that we have a research community ready to do this work. We need quality researchers able and ready to make these investments work. I would like to hear a comment on how each of these countries, including the NIH, are going to ensure that we have people ready to spend this money. Thank you.
So building the pipeline of researchers is a question that I think is a question that is on all our minds. So we have a question there, and then I want the DG to maybe mention something about the Life Prize.
Thank you very much for the ministers, for the concerns, personnel. Really, I want to ask about, we have really a plentiful of the research from the academia. How can this research really to be incorporated within the operational research of the Ministry of the Health? We have thousands and thousands of this research. They are coming and they are not really tackling the main priorities as regard our problems in the Ministry of the Health. So incorporations between the academic really research and the Ministry of the Health research and also the operational research, how can we invest this research all together in order to be well really tackling the main priorities as regard ending of the TB and as regard all the preventive and all the areas of the concerns in the TB. Thank you very much.
Thanks. So I'm going to ask the final question to my DG from South Africa.
Well, thank you. I didn't raise my hand. I think she just wanted to hear my voice, but it's fine. No, perhaps just to say, indeed, like Tony Fauci said, imagine the world without TB. Imagine the world without TB, where government can commit to R&D, where we can have innovative financing, and innovative financing not only to fund R&D, but also to ensure that when those medicines or vaccines are developed, they can be accessed, they can be affordable. But I also wanted to re-echo the statement about the tripod about R&D to find rapid diagnostics that offer specificity and sensitivity, affordable medicines that are shorter, that have shorter duration, but that are simple to use and are less toxic, as well as vaccines. So we probably need to have a holistic approach. And my question then to the panelists is, how do we reduce just about 20,000 tablets that people drink daily to probably around 350 in 3 months? My vision and my wish is that we reduce about 24,000 that those with TB, particularly MDR TB, swallow daily, about 20,000. Imagine what their bodies look like. Reduce those to about 350 at most. Thank you.
So thank you. So I'm going to ask the panelists to respond. So maybe the issue on mHealth, we can ask the Ghanaian Deputy Minister to address. The issues around capacity development, the European Commission and the NIH, the issues of reducing the poor burden, and some of the issues around the implementation and science. So if we could just ask, we could start with Tony and go through, and you can make some comments on the questions that were asked. Thanks.
So let me try and answer the question that was asked about the training the next generation of investigators. Where are they going to come from? When you were asking that question, I couldn't help but think of a very popular movie that was shown in the United States years ago called Field of Dreams, and it was about someone who wanted to build a baseball stadium in the middle of nowhere, and they were questioning, but if you build a baseball stadium, who's going to fill it? And he said, build it and they will come. So what I'm trying to say is that when we started HIV, as you might remember, Glenda, in 1982, we had a meeting in the Department of Health and Human Services of all the people that we could recognize who were working on a disease that didn't even have a name yet. And we had the meeting in a room at the Department of Health and Human Services, and there were 12 of us in the room, of all the people we could identify that were working on this. So we put a lot of money in it. At the last International AIDS Conference meeting, there were 25,000 people there. And the reason is because we put billions of dollars into research on HIV. So I worry less about who is going to spend it than getting the money, and then they will come. And I think that's really the answer. If we make major investments, they will come.
Yeah. So some quick concluding remarks, because we still have our announcement to make. I'm going to ask people just to quickly make quick comments on the questions that were posed.
Okay, if I may, speaking about digital tools. In the EU, we have e-health program. We have a digital single market, big program. We have Connecting Europe facilities, a lot of investment, and digital instruments in prophylaxis, in primary health care, in monitoring are crucial. And from our side, we have introduced a lot of in research of digital instruments, a lot. Please look on our websites, you can see a lot. Second question is about, about investment generally. But if I may raise one question. For example, in one hand you have international tobacco companies and tobacco industry. In another hand, you have how many people they are killing with tobacco, yes? Can we discuss issues not in this room, but globally, to introduce taxation on tobacco industry and put the taxation and put those money, those revenues, into research or concretely into achievement of sustainable development goals, because sustainable development goals are our priorities.
So we're talking about tobacco, alcohol, and sugar.
Yes, of course. Tobacco, alcohol, sugar. But of course, in speaking of tuberculosis, tobacco is number one. Can we act and can we join our forces? Can you ask United States, Russia, all of us, help us to ratify illicit trade protocol, to move forward with fighting smuggling and stopping tobacco, because tobacco industry now is very active in developing countries. Please look at figures of how many people are starting to smoke. Yes, it's if we can achieve, and TB.
I'm going to stop you because we have a few minutes left, and I love your passion about tobacco. So maybe a quick concluding remarks from the rest of the panelists. If you have any comments that you would like to make, are you like to make anything?
Thanks very much. I would like to take this question that has been already voiced. We're different countries. We have different ministries of health. How can we put our hands together in combating tuberculosis and doing the research? By way of example, I would like to refer to those research network of the BRICS countries. So we held a working group meeting held on the 13th of November when we discussed priority lines of research in fighting tuberculosis. So we should first define them, and then we can streamline the mechanisms that make it happen, and developing some joint programs on these priorities research. After all, I listened to what the representatives from Africa would say, and also listened to what the representatives from India, Indonesia would say. We have quite a number of common approaches, and the challenges are also common, and we could actually join our efforts at least between BRICS countries, and not just address but tackle TB challenges.
We will address those. But I would like Dr. Teresa to come up. Dr. Teresa is from the Ministerial Health and Russian Federation, and she is a champion on TB research. And I met her a couple of years ago, and I was inspired by her passion and her dedication to try and find a solution for the TB research gap in BRICS.
Thank
you very much, dear Glenda. I guess that I am that black horse which was announced by you as the newsmaker. So, Your Excellencies, Ministers, high panelists, it was really a great pleasure and great honor to listen to you, to stay with you on one stage. First of all, let me say that we are very proud about our President, Vladimir Putin, and his leadership and commitment to ending TB, and of course about his support all our initiatives of the Minister of Health, and personally Professor Veronika Skvartsova. Since yesterday, I received maybe a dozen messages about news flashes about the top priority news that our President support the establishment of BRICS TB Research Network. Of course, it's one of the top news of our conference, and we are very proud. So I am standing here not only as a representative of the Minister of Health, and I'm especially proud about it that I am also representing here officially BRICS TB Research Network, and it was created, I must say it, very strong. So according to the Xiamen Declaration that was signed by the leaders of our countries, we established BRIC Research Network, and we had already 2 basic meetings. Many thanks for the leadership and initiative of Brazilian colleagues for organizing the first very important meeting, where we created and tried to identify our priorities and created the terms of references, timetable for the nearest perspective and for the future, and also developed the structure of our network. Each country sent their representatives, official representative. We created coordinating body and working groups for the nearest concrete and very strong movement forward. So what are the priorities of our work? First, as it was mentioned by Honorable Deputy Minister, we must identify priorities of scientific research, development and initiative. Foster the development of new, effective, safe and affordable diagnostics and treatment regimens for all forms of TB. Conduct multi-country TB studies for new medical products, vaccines and technologies regarding feasibility, effectiveness and impact evaluation. promote multisectoral research towards achieving universal health access, provide patient-centered care and social protection to achieve the TB targets of the Sustainable Development Goals, identify sources and means of financing and support in-country capacities for TB research activities, including technology transfer and manufacturing mechanism, provide scientific evidences and findings from joint activities developed by the network to support TB policies in the BRICS and other countries, as well as international organizations. Strengthen the collaboration between the BRICS and the WHO for TB control and promote the WHO anti-TB strategy, in particular its Pillar 3. Strengthen the collaboration between the BRICS TB Research Network and other international organizations and relevant partners to TB control worldwide, including the discussion and work around antimicrobial resistant agenda. Foster the development and implementation of innovative mechanisms for R&D, guided by the principles of affordability, effectiveness, efficiency, and equity. So it's time to demonstrate to everybody that we, high-burden countries, must demonstrate our high commitment and make our high input in the solving of the problem and movement towards ending TB. Thank you very much, dear colleagues.
So thank you, Teresa. So to end off, what we have presented is a BRICS TB research network, and which will collaborate with other institutions to bring about the objectives that have been noted there. And so I want to thank the BRICS working group and for the vision of establishing this. I think it's very exciting and shows great initiative for countries that really have a high burden of TB. So what you've heard today is that despite significant progress, previous investments are not sufficient to warrant success in challenging multi-drug resistant TB diagnostics and the lack of a TB vaccine pipeline. And so we need more money, we need more innovation, and we need to be able to deploy the products of our innovation effectively. We need to amplify individual country efforts, and we've heard from TAG saying that we need to amplify individual country efforts. We need to coordinate our efforts better, and so this BRICS TB research network is important to be able to coordinate our efforts better. And we do need this global strategy. I must put it up again. This global strategy for TB research. We need this global strategy for TB research. So ministers, funders, people living with TB and affected by TB, collectively we need to amplify our efforts. All of us need to amplify our efforts. We need to speak for research. We need new tools. We need a vaccine, and we need to speak about access. And we can only do this together, and we can only do it so we can get tangible action at UNGA. So thank you very much.